Hey everybody, it's your friendly neighborhood Jerry Rasco, and I'm here with you again today to review another issue of The Amazing Spider-Man together with you. Today we are looking at The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 37. It's an interesting issue. It's got some interesting plot points that will really carry through to the rest of the series. And is kind of an interesting sort of starting point or jumping on point. This would be a good issue for somebody who maybe hadn't been collecting Spider-Man up to this point and maybe wanted to come along and could get in essence, the ground floor. We'll go over all of that, of course. But first, I want to thank all of you for watching the video. Everybody who has been viewing the videos, subscribing to the channel, liking them, thumbs up, anybody who, of course, is adding comments. I really appreciate all that. Thank you all so much for checking these out and going on this journey with me. It's been a lot of fun to look at all these issues of The Amazing Spider-Man so far, going all the way back to The Amazing Fantasy 15, the first appearance of Spider-Man. So if you are new to the channel, take a look at the playlist. We do have every episode going all the way back to the beginning, and you can go back, view those, and catch up. So without further ado, let's get over, take a look at this comic together, and I'll share my thoughts with you. So here we go. So here is the cover for The Amazing Spider-Man number 37. It is interesting. The imagery is good. I'm going to start with that. I think that both of these images of Spider-Man fighting a robot in and of themselves are good and could certainly be a cover. I think the one on the left, obviously with the fire where he's struggling against this sort of tentacly goopy robot, is probably the more dynamic of the two, but certainly the one with him kicking this robot shooting a beam out of its eye, done up a little more dramatically, could certainly be its own cover. And then we have this main villain in the middle with this weird gadget on his head. We'll find out all about that. So overall, good imagery. The one thing I didn't like about it is, to me, it feels like maybe there are two stories, especially because, and we'll get into this more as we see the issue, the thing on the left, the green globby thing that's the Spidey is fighting in the flames, to me doesn't feel or look like a robot. It could be an alien, it could be a monster from under the sea, it could be some kind of chemical mutant creation, something like that from, 60s science fiction. But to me, it doesn't scream robot. The one on the right screams robot, especially for the time. So it feels to me like it's almost two stories. Like this book is going to have story number one, and then halfway through it'll come to a conclusion, and then there'll be story number two. And sometimes those types of books where you have a bunch of individual stories within them, small short stories making up a whole issue, aren't always my favorites. So this might be something that if I didn't know what was going on, I might have passed by. But this is all one story, and we'll get into the whole thing here. So anyway, that's my thoughts on this cover. Interesting, but could be a little different. But let's jump in and see how it plays out with the story. So as always, let me clarify for anybody who's new, what we're looking at here is a scanned PDF copy of the original comic book. This was from 1966. So in 2004, Marvel Comics got a hold of a copy of this book and scanned it as is, and then put it onto CD-ROMs at the time, not DVDs or Blu-rays or any kind of other media, but CD-ROMs, and you could purchase them and view the original comic, which is what we're doing here. So you'll see the yellowing of the page. You'll see sometimes I point out in one area there are some printing errors. We'll see the original ads, all that kind of stuff. So it does give us a good look at what the comic really would have looked like for somebody picking it up back in 1966. So we start off with this splash page. I've talked about these many times if you are a follower or fan of the channel. I'm not a huge fan of the splash page that isn't part of the story. So in this case, what we have is this sort of montage of Peter looking at all the players of the story. But what even makes it harder is that they're so small, and I can zoom in so we can see that there's very little detail in these small figures, so that some of them aren't really clear as to who they are. So we have the two robots. We have J. Jonah Jameson. We have this character here in the green suit that will be identified. We have a man in a hat. Again, if you read the story, you know who it is, but at the surface, it's not necessarily clear. We have this guy over here, and if you've been reading the book all along, you would know that this is Patch, and this is a disguise used by one of the reporters for the Daily Bugle named Frederick Foswell, who was a one-time villain who's reformed and now is a reporter. We have this is Gwen Stacy, but then these two guys, so this is the bad guy from the cover because he has this weird thing on his head. We don't know who these other two guys are. So who are these other two characters? But it's not particularly clear. I do like the image of Peter with his hair messed up because it looks like he's just pulled his mask off, and it's kind of neat how it's just sort of hanging there. I think you have a lot of empty space around these characters. I mean, I get the idea that it's supposed to be like they're on a surface or almost like, it's in his web, if you will. But I think you could have made the characters larger to help us identify them, or at the very least, make the robots more of a feature. But again, that is just me. So that's what I would do differently in terms of the splash page, or I would just go straight into the story, to be honest. So let's do that. Let's go into the story here. So in terms of the art, one of the things I do want to point out that I noticed a lot in this issue, and the artist Steve Dikto does this a lot anyway, but there are a ton of foreground elements that are very close to the camera. So when we talk about these issues, when I say camera, what I mean is the view of the reader. So we use terms in comics that are very similar to things like scripts from plays or stage direction, camera direction for television or movies. So when we talk about where the camera is positioned, that is the view that the reader has of that image. So in the case here, if you look at panel number 5, we have this hand holding a pistol, and it's very close to the foreground. You also have, in the panel before it, you have this branch, which is in front of this character, who turns out to be Frederick Foswell. And the branch is just a framing device to give us depth, to see that there's something here, then there's another layer of Frederick, then he is in front of this tree, which is overlapping some of the bushes, which is overlapping the car. So all of that creates a illusion of depth on a two-dimensional plane, which is our goal as artists. We have it here. We have branches and stuff. So we are the camera view is sort of through the trees, through the bushes, if you will, looking at this prison where this character is being released after 10 years in prison. He is noted as Professor Strom, but because he's been in prison for 10 years, we have never seen him before. So we don't know who he is. We don't know why he was in prison. All we know is that he's being released, and it looks like he's got some plans. Someone is going to, looks like, get the drop on Frederick Foswell and wants to shoot him. And all of a sudden, Spidey pops out of the tree and takes care of this would-be assassin. Now, what I noted, which I didn't understand, is why is Spider-Man here? It's never clear. It's never explained in the dialogue or narration of why is Spider-Man here. As far as we know, there's no connection to him and Dr. Strom. Again, Dr. Strom was in prison for 10 years. And if we go by Peter's, if this is real time, or relatively real time, Peter became Spider-Man in high school. He finished high school, and now he's in his first year of college. So he can't have been Spider-Man for more than 5 years total. So this guy was in prison before Peter ever got bit by the spider. He could be following Frederick Foswell, looking for a story, but this guy is really sneaking around, and so why is Spidey there? Again, it's just one of those things that it would be very nice to explain, and it really isn't. And it's just sort of dropped, and we move on, and we kind of forget about it. Now, part of that is we only have a limited number of pages. These stories at this time, for the most part, are what I refer to as one and done. You have one comic, and it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. There are some plot threads that carry through. Very seldomly do we see a complete cliffhanger where the story stops in the midpoint, and then we come back in the next month and pick it up where we left off. So if you only have a certain number of pages, and to be fair, in my opinion, we've wasted one on a splash page, then maybe we don't have time to explain why Spidey is following Frederick Foswell around. That might take a whole page or half a page, and pages are valuable real estate. So, in any case, this is what happens. Spidey stops the assassin, and then he gets him to follow Foswell. And I think this is very funny. This made me laugh. There are some definite comedic elements to this episode or issue. So Spidey knocks the guy out, or not knocks the guy out, but punches the guy. The guy loses the gun, threatens him, webs him inside the car so he can't escape. Spidey puts on the hat so that anybody driving by won't realize or notice that there's Spider-Man in the back of a car. And yet somehow the police are following him because it turns out the car is stolen. So Spidey in mid-drive just opens the door, zips out a web, and takes off. So kind of funny, more of a humor. It doesn't really move the story forward a lot, other than he's trying to follow... actually, he's following the professor. He's not following Foswell. And then he loses him. So did we need this? Other than a little bit of a comedy beat? Not so much, but that's okay. And then here we cut to the Daily Bugle, and Jonah is looking for Foswell, and we notice here's another kind of joke, if you will. The original secretary that we were introduced to for the Daily Bugle was Betty Brant, and she has left over relationship issues that she had between her, Peter, and this other guy named Ned Leeds. And every issue, it seems like Jonah has to hire a new secretary to replace her because they don't want to put up with him. So that's a nice little joke there, where every issue we're seeing a new secretary show up, which is kind of funny. So there's something going on. Foswell's talking about this guy, Professor Strom. He knows him from prison, and he is trying to get a story because he thinks that guy Strom has pledged revenge on the person who sent him to jail. And so Peter's like, all right, I'm going to follow this along too. And he puts a spider tracer, which is a gimmick of Spider-Man that I love. He has these little spider-shaped tracers. We'll see them again, that he can track, so he can keep track of people. And he puts it on his hat. I think it's absolutely brilliant. It's a piece of like I said, a gimmick that I think really works, that Spidey has that maybe other heroes other than, say, like a Batman don't have. So now we cut back to Professor Strom, and we find out that he is definitely into revenge for a person who stole all of his inventions, and so he is going to build some robots. Here we have Peter and Gwen. This ties back to the previous issue where the two of them were at a science museum together when the bad guy of that issue, the Looter, highly recommend, go ahead and check out the previous episode. He was there, and Gwen thinks that Peter ran out as a coward because he had to run away to change to Spider-Man. So she's not really happy with him. They have this sort of on again, off again. She's interested, then she's mad at him. Then she's interested, and she's mad at him. And Peter calls her out. he calls her out to it. So she says something kind of nasty to him, even though he's being nice. And so he lets her have it. And he's like, well, I can't tell what kind of mood you're going to be in from day to day. It's not exactly what he says, but it's the gist of it. And she gets so mad that he calls her out that she tries to slap him, which of course he blocks easily. So I thought that was very interesting that, man, you're going to show her slapping Peter for calling her out, even though what he said is completely legitimate. So I just said, damn, that's okay. So now we get a little taste of Gwen Stacy and what she's about, and this interesting start to the Peter-Gwen Stacy relationship. Of course, Flash Thompson butts his nose in for 2 seconds, but doesn't really amount to much of anything. Again, talking about foreground elements. So you see Gwen here in the near foreground as we look through. Again, another framing device to show Flash coming between the figures. Again, another big close-up of Gwen. Here, they're in school. They're working in the science lab. Peter has, science tubes and vials and test tubes and stuff in front of him. Again, another sort of framing device. And then we have this robot. So I air quote robot, because to me it doesn't look like a robot. Again, it could be gelatinous, it could be alive, it could be all kinds of things. But it is being controlled by Professor Strom, and he uses this device. I like the design of this device. I think it's kind of neat. I'm assuming that this sort of lens lets him look through the robot's eyes or sensors, and that this device controls it with his mental commands. So that's a neat device. Very, a lot of people would call this Kirby-esque. So Jack Kirby, the other main Marvel artist at the time, was very much known for sort of this crazy style or aesthetic of technology that he would draw. And this device kind of reminds me of that. It has a little bit of a Kirby aesthetic. But anyway, the robot design, this weird tentacly globby robot thing, is definitely not Kirby-esque in terms of drawing technology. So now the thing goes out, and it's gloopy. It can stretch its arms. It can make arms, it appears, out of different, these little bulges. It can stick to walls. It does a bunch of stuff, and it's super strong, so it can tear this electronics plant apart. But again, it just doesn't scream robot to me in the classic sense. So maybe if you could see a little bit of the technology in it or explain how it works, that might help. I did want to point this out. I don't know what happened here, but this is clearly a printing / coloring error. So nobody would have colored it quite like this, but when this happens, usually what that means is the plate would have been misaligned on this panel when it went through the printing. So in order to print stuff, what you would do is, in the old days, you would have your piece of paper and it would go through a printing press, and each pass would put a different color on. So it would start with your maybe magenta, and then cyan, and then your yellow, and then your more red, and then eventually at the end putting the black lines over the top of all of it. So obviously something was misaligned here with the red printing plate, so that it came out this way. Just one of those things that happens in the old school printing. In today's printing world with comics, it's digital. So in my experience, when I printed my comic, I sent it to the printer. I had all the files done, and they sent it back to me as PDF files like this that showed all the pages together and what they would look like. And I was able to go through and say, okay, yep, that looks right. Or, oh no, this is misaligned. Or, oh no, that color's not right. I need to shift that or make changes or whatever. So the digital artist proof is what they call it. Was very, very helpful to make sure I didn't have these kinds of mistakes. But in the old days, again, you're printing a comic every month. It's being printed on the cheap. It's being printed on newsprint paper, which is super, super thin and disposable, if you will. These comics were not made for people to keep for 60 or 70 years. These things were made to be read, traded, passed around, folded up, rolled up, and then you move on to the next one. They really were kind of disposable. There was no thought of a true collector market back in the 60s, not the way we have today, at least. And so maybe somebody noted it and went, we don't have time to fix it. Moving on. And they moved on. So we've got a fire and from the destruction, and Spidey is coming in to save the day. And the robot is immediately giving him a hard time. It's strong, it's gloopy, it can adjust and fight him. And I love this page right here. This is a great page. We have the thing getting the upper hand and starting to wrap itself around Spidey, and these positions that he's in as he's struggling. So there's both the flex of muscles, right? So we see him trying to stretch and get this thing to let it go. But at the same time, his limbs are being pulled into positions that they shouldn't be, or he won't want them to be, because the thing is so strong. So you get that sense of, really, you can feel it by the twisting of the bodies, that both of these things are pulling against each other, the robot and Spidey. So these are really, really great poses. This is an interesting close-up of Spidey with the tentacle around his head. And it's just this sort of neat angle. A lot of times when you see Spider-Man, especially from straight on, his face is just round. But let me see if I can find a good example to talk about. So sort of here, his face is obscured by his fists. Over here, like in this advertisement, for example, we've seen this pin up before. The head is an oval or roundish shape. However, when you change different angles, Steve Dikto definitely, here's one right here where Spidey's face is just sort of a round oval. But Steve Dikto knew that when you turn it in space, it's three-dimensional, and his nose underneath the mask is going to jut out, and then the mask is going to cut straight down to his chin where it's tight because of the angle. Because your chin doesn't come out as far as your nose. At least it doesn't for people like me with bigger noses. So that's a neat way of creating that three-dimensionality of Spidey's face that we don't always see. So I thought that was really nice. Spidey takes a leap into the fire, hoping the fire will damage the robot, which it does, and he's able to escape. So this is where you have your image from the cover of this thing wrapped around Spidey and him diving into the fire. Now we're going to cut back to Professor Strom's laboratory, and we see him constructing a more traditional robot that he's going to do. So he's happy that the first robot destroyed this plant, but now he's building another robot. And I find myself saying, why? Why wouldn't you just build this robot to begin with? Or why wouldn't you build multiples of this tentacle robot? Because it seems to be very effective. The logic isn't there for me. I don't understand why, but he's doing it. So this robot is a more traditional humanoid metal mechanical thing with basically a laser beam coming from the one big eye that he can control. So then we see who owns this plant, and it is none other than the father of Harry Osborn. So Harry Osborn, Peter's classmate who does not like Peter at all, and this is his dad, Norman Osborn. So I don't remember. I think we've seen Norman Osborn maybe once before. This comes up, we'll see in the next couple pages. There's a club, some sort of like basically rich guys club that J. Jonah Jameson belongs to. And I know there's an issue we've already reviewed where he's in that club and he's talking about his feud with Spider-Man. And I don't remember if Norman Osborn is one of the people in that club or not, that that Jonah speaks to him. So it's very possible that we've seen Norman Osborn before, but it's also possible that this may be the first appearance of Norman Osborn, which, spoilers, if you're a fan of Marvel Comics, you know Norman Osborn becomes a very important person. So he his thoughts, he lets it know. It's Professor Strom was his partner. He is the one that framed him to send him to jail so that he could steal all of his inventions and make all of his fortune. So Norman Osborn is a real bad guy who has a bad secret, who is trying to hide this secret from everybody, including his son and the authorities, and of course Professor Strom. So, well, Strom knows, but he's trying to, keep it quiet. So here comes Jonah, and this is the thing. He talks about this club that they belong to. And again, look at the close-up framing devices. So we have this twisted metal that's up close that's helping to frame the discussion of the three men over here. We have this nice shot through the window. So we have a close-up of the frame of the window that Spidey goes in when he follows Frederick Foswell home. And then we have a few more. We have sort of this fence and a wall area. And then, of course, Spidey's peeking around the corner. So we have the building in front. So again, I noticed it a lot. And I know Steve Dikto has done it before, and we've talked about it in this series, but it just seemed very obvious to me in this particular issue of how much elements were always in the foreground of so many panels, almost every panel. Here, the hat, stuff like that. Even Spidey's head, it's not very prominent, but he is clearly in the foreground, and we're seeing what he sees below. Here's the new robot. Again, another close-up of the Spidey head. And I really like this. So here, he's going to use his spider tracer again, and this time he's going to tag the robot so he can track that robot down if he needs to. But I liked the tilt of the head. So again, with a character like Spider-Man and this costume, it's hard sometimes to show him in extreme angles because you have to know how the form of the head would work plus the webbing design. And that's not always easy. But Steve Dikto has done a great job here. He really feels like he's turning that head because we can see that dark underside of the jaw, which is really, really nice. And then the other thing I wanted to point out was this slight squinting of the eyes. So usually the white part of Spidey's eyes is big and sort of follows this pattern of the black. Here we have, it looks like he's sort of aiming or, judging the distance because he's going to throw this tracer. So I like that little squinting of the white part of the eye. Of course, we see that in modern comics, modern Spidey a lot, especially you see it with like the movies where in the Marvel version of Spider-Man with Tom Holland, the costume tends to have a mechanical eye that is his expression changes, the eye opens and closes. So I thought that was really cool. Let me just check my notes. Let's see. Yep. One thing I did want to point out. I kept talking about this robot and how the screen robot, to me, doesn't seem like a robot. So Spidey sees it and he doesn't know what it is. There's something, and it's got a tentacle, and the tentacle grabbed him. And then he says, "It's a robot." And I said, my note, I said, "Why did you jump to robot? It doesn't, in a world of Marvel Comics where there are aliens, Atlanteans, Asgardians, mutants, monsters, why would I jump to robot when there doesn't look anything mechanical about this thing?" So anyway, just my 2 cents. Let's see. Struggling, Norman Osborn. I said, this robot looks like a robot. It does. The head tilt. Yep. Oh, one other thing I noted here. So we've had him following around Frederick Foswell, both in his regular guise and his patch. This is Foswell under a mask. And then, of course, he tags this robot so he can track that. But in the past, the way that Spidey's spider tracers work, they would send out a radio signal, and he had a little device that he would wear a lot of times on a string or a web around his neck, and it had a little device, and he would track it the way you would probably, I'm assuming, like a Geiger counter. The closer you get, the more it's going to beep or go or click or whatever. Well, here we don't see that device. So I'm wondering, is this the end of the mechanical way of tracking the device? How is Spidey tracking it if he doesn't have that device? He must be using his own spider sense to track it, which is the modern interpretation of how his spider tracers work. They work on the same signal that his spider sense does. So the closer he gets to them, he gets the tingle, and he can tell that he's close to one of his tracers. So maybe that's what we're seeing here, is that transition from a mechanical way of tracking to more of his spider powers being the method. So the robot, so Spidey escapes and continues to track down the robot. The robot attacks Norman Osborn. One of the things, we talk about this a lot in these books, and that has to do with the page layout. And one of the things you might note in this book, which I did, is there are little to no splash pages, half splash page, quarter splash page, not even really large panels. Everything is very, very small and very gridded out. That means we have a lot. So we've gone all the way back to the beginning. We have a lot of story. And the more panels you have, the faster your pacing is. So even though there's a ton of dialogue, every panel is a new sort of moment of a conversation or an action or something. We have a lot of them. It reads fast. The comic reads fast. You move through it pretty quickly. And that's because, again, that pacing of the comic is very fast. There's no, so that's good and bad. On one hand, you want your pacing to move fast. It keeps the reader's attention. On the other hand, sometimes you need a moment to breathe. As a reader, we need that moment to transition from one scene to another, or from one element of drama to another. And I think this issue could have used some of that. But again, we have very limited real estate in terms of the number of pages and a lot of stuff to get through. So we've gone from Spidey chasing down, trying to track down Professor Strom, doing it, finding Foswell, stopping the bad guy that was going to kill Foswell. He escapes, but then Spidey also escapes, and now he is following the robot using his, apparently, spider sense. The robot has gone to Norman Osborn's office, and he is now talking directly through the robot as Professor Strom. This should remind you of another character that we've seen called Professor Smythe. And Smythe is the one that has created a couple of different robots designed to track and defeat Spider-Man. Those robots are later referred to as Spider Slayers. So what we see here in terms of the plot of a doctor, evil professor who's creating robots to try to destroy stuff. In this case, Norman Osborn, not Spidey. Spidey's just kind of getting in the way. But very kind of similar plot lines. So the robot comes and he's destroying everything. And of course, he'll kill Norman last. But he wants to destroy him first and take him down. Nice little note here. You have the robot shooting his laser beam, which generates a lot of light. So we have some nice lighting technique here with the areas away from the beam being more dark, including the back of the robot. And then if you look at the robot's butt, there is that little red spot. That is the spider tracer. So that's a nice attention to detail, that the spider tracer is still stuck to the robot, which is how Spidey knows where he is and can come in and try to save the day. So now he's got a whole nother robot. And this one is equally strong, but he has this destructive beam. So this time, Spidey is able to play more of a cat and mouse, where the other robot could stretch and grab him. So he's doing that. Again, I want to point out one more time, the foreground elements. We have this sort of technology element in the corner here, helping to frame up Dr. Strom. We have the robot in the front framing up Norman and his response. So we have some nice framing elements throughout the issue, and fast pacing, quick panels, fast pacing. Same here. Spidey continues to fight the robot, trying to figure out what he's going to do. Throws a big piece of equipment at it. That doesn't work, and that's a nice sound effect. We haven't really talked about the sound effects that much. I think there's a couple of different ways that sound effects are done. So in one way, sometimes the artist will incorporate the sound effect into the art to where it's going around things. So in this case, like this thump sort of, there's areas that are slightly behind the art, and then overlapping the panel and in front of other pieces of art. So sometimes the sound effects are done by the letterer of the comic. Sometimes the sound effects are drawn in by the artist. So I when I look at it, I'm always curious to think in my head, was this the letterer who put this in? Or did Steve Dikto draw it in because of the way that it sort of integrates around with what would have been the line art? Interesting question. Without seeing the original page, it'd be very hard to tell. If we saw the original page, you would actually see if the letterer put it on, it would actually be typically pasted. Like they would actually write these word balloons on separate pieces of paper, or sometimes cut them. That way they could move them around to find the best position where it would go, and they pasted it onto the art. Excuse me. And so that, interesting. This could have been drawn on as part of the original art, or it could have been pasted in. Then we have, again, still nice lighting, still where we have the laser, and the areas of Spidey that are farther away from this laser beam are darker shadowed, which is nice. Same thing here. The laser hits this beam that he's next to, and he ducks out of the way. So you have the right side of him is very well lit, and the left side away is very dark, including the back of this arm and the side of his head. Now, I had a note here. This is kind of story stuff that, again, didn't make a lot of sense to me. Norman Osborn does not want Spidey to interfere. He has been noting how he has plans. He was going to get rid of Strom forever. And that if Spidey defeats the robot, that could interfere with those plans. He also mentions that he says he's becoming, and I assume that means Spidey. I hope this robot finishes him off, meaning Spidey. He's becoming too dangerous to my plans. So what kind of plans does a guy who has a electronics plant and several, technology businesses, what kinds of plans does he have that Spidey could be disrupting? Interesting, right? If you know, you know. If you don't, we'll find out together. But here, Norman Osborn hits Spider-Man from behind. So question number one, where's Spidey's spider sense? Now, could be the spider sense is warning him of this danger, and he can't tell the difference between the laser beam danger and the person behind him. But he's also a superhero that's been in the business for a while. He's usually more aware of his surroundings. So for a normal guy to get the drop on Spider-Man and punch him in the back of the head seems unusual. Here's the next piece. He punches him. Spidey goes down like a sack of potatoes, and then Norman runs off. And he says, if that blow didn't finish him off, the robot can do it. So he anticipates, he thinks that punch to the back of the head could have finished Spider-Man off. Now, just in the last episode alone, the last issue we looked at, Spider-Man took on a super strong character who could, lift heavy machinery equipment, like rocketry equipment and stuff. And Spidey took punches to the jaw and just outpunched the guy. But yet somehow Norman Osborn, an entrepreneur, businessman, industrialist, punches Spidey in the back of the head and expects that that's going to finish him off. And it puts him out for several panels. So the robot sees him, goes, I'll let him go. He also is kind of speculating. He doesn't, the robot, or Strom through the robot, doesn't realize that Norman is the one that punched him. And the robot just keeps doing his stuff and tromps off. And then Spidey finally comes to and thinks he was hit by a piece of debris, which maybe he was. We don't exactly see it. We sort of, it's in front, but it's definitely this punch that does it. And you can see how that is depicted with this little burst behind Spidey's head. So how could that happen? Anyway, I think, again, if you know, we know the answers because obviously we're looking back in history and we know what happens later. But if you were a new reader, this wouldn't make sense. Spidey gets his act together and continues to chase because, of course, he can still track the robot, and he flies after him. Real quick note, I do try to point these out sometimes when it's obvious or I can see them. Here we have a small coloring error. So this is Spidey's web. It's in his hand. It comes out, assumingly, on the bottom of his right hand. So he has his left hand on top, right hand on the bottom. So the web would come out the bottom of his right hand, and it's swirling around him behind him. And the colorist must have gotten it confused with these lines on the floor depicting like the structure of the floor. Well, no, because that when it would have been blue. So I don't know why. Somewhere along the line, somebody forgot and left this bubble white. So maybe they just forgot to color it in, or I don't know. But somewhere along the line, that's a coloring error there. Just wanted to point that out. The fight continues. Spidey finally gets the upper hand with leverage, and is able to sort of slam the robot around until he breaks it. And then even the head is still working for a little bit. The laser, he smashes that as well. So now, though, there is a gun being pointed into the window. And so the Strom is about to tell his secret. And so we're assuming that the gun is there to shoot Strom. Spidey sees it. His spider sense works this time. And he pushes Strom out of the way, but Strom still has a heart attack. So I noted this reminds me of, if you remember the Crime Master. So there was a episode we did with this villain who was trying to take over organized crime, and he was competing with the Green Goblin to take over the mobs of New York. And in the end, just when he was about to reveal the identity of the Green Goblin, he dies. And this kind of reminded me of that, where Strom is about to tell us a big secret, and then he died. So while the shooter wasn't able to shoot him, he still died of apparently a heart attack. So there we go. And now we have the wrap up. Everybody in terms of Jonah and Norman and Harry Osborn are all good. They're happy. This Strom was done. He was crazy. The secret is kept. And so everybody's good to go. Of course, we see here's the gun. So Norman was going to shoot Strom. But now he thinks that Spider-Man might be after him. So he's going to have to deal with Spidey. And so you go, wow, okay. Again, why is this businessman that dark and that ready to get rid of Spidey? And we have a wrap up, of course, of Peter in his own head, kind of summarizing everything, trying to figure out what's going, what does this mean? And then we see in the next episode, we'll see more of Norman Osborn and a new villain. And then there's the issue. So from an artistic standpoint, there's not a lot that I took note of that was overly ambitious or cutting edge, something that we hadn't seen before. But but a well-paced, well told story that gets the point across and moves us to the next issue. So we're going to cut back over here to the desk and we'll wrap up this episode. So that is Amazing Spider-Man number 37, written by Stan Lee, plotted and drawn by Steve Dikto. And it's a good issue. I would rate it a 7 out of 10. It's, like I said, it's a fast read. Even though there's a ton of dialogue and stuff going on, there's lots of action. The robot fights are good. There's some mystery as to what is going on with this Norman Osborn guy. And a little bit of minor development, continuing into Peter's personal life with his college classmates, especially Gwen Stacy. So pretty good. Because of the Norman Osborn stuff, I think it's maybe more important than, say, like the previous issue where we didn't see quite as much of the story progression. So this one to me seems like a more key issue, something you definitely would want to have as part of your story collection. So that's my thoughts. Hopefully you enjoyed the issue as well. I'm very interested and very excited to continue on this journey. We are quickly closing in on the end of the Steve Ditko run of Spider-Man. He has a few more issues to go. And then from there, there's a different artist that takes over the book. And we're going to review all that and cover all that in our next episodes. It's going to be a lot of fun to see the differences between these artists and how they handled essentially the same character in continuing stories, but every artist brings their own sensibilities to it. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. So thank you very much for joining me today. Thank you for checking out this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We do have a lot of stuff coming up, including here in this, our Spider-Man reviews. Very excited and looking forward to that. So keep your eyes peeled. Make sure you click on notifications so you see when every new episode launches. We do try to put these out on Monday mornings at 8 a.m. So make sure you don't miss one. And we will see you next week with another amazing Spider-Man. Thanks.